with amazing panels of speakers. We will be having 4 panels. The first panel has 4 speakers. Each one will be presenting their work. Then we have a nice little coffee break. You can step outside and see the beautiful sea and the mountains with the snow and have a network. And then you come back in, and then we'll have 4 artist practitioners who will be speaking. I'll be moderating the first panel. And then we have a lunch break. You're all welcome to go out for lunch, enjoy your time, and come back. Don't stay there. Then we have another panel of 4 speakers. They're fantastic talks, very, very, you have it in your program, very eclectic. As you know, this year the theme is displacement and seeking refuge as seen through comics. In response to global demographic shifts and unprecedented levels of human displacement, the symposium looks to explore what it means to be displaced. It also is looking at the landscape and the impact of graphic novels or narratives of displacement and exile. While investigating comics, we really want to look at comics as a form of reportage, as a form of documentation and representation of the displaced people, which I think is a really important aspect. The symposium also intends to present arguments framing graphic narratives of displacement as a critical tool in challenging gender norms, teaching the history of displacement and conflict, and making research accessible to the affected populations who are displaced or refugees. Through the panel discussions with the artists and the practitioners who are drawing these issues, the roundtable talks hopefully aim to address their roles as artists and sometimes even as refugees. I mean, we have artists from Syria here who will be presenting, in their role in representing and documenting the circumstances that the displaced were subjected to and encountered in. The reasons for leaving, the perils of the journey, living in the host country from discrimination to legal issues, and finally to opportunities that are presented. We hope you enjoy our talks today, and we want to keep you with us all day, so I'll get started. A little bit in Arabic. صباح الخير. ما رح يكون كل شيء مترجم بالعربي، بس رح نجرب دايما أقدم لكم شوي نبذة صغيرة عن الموضوع. أول شيء صباح الخير، أهلا وسهلا فيكم كلكم معنا اليوم بالندوة صباح الخير الندوة السنوية للشرائط المصورة العربية تحت هالسنة تحت عنوان النزوح وطلب اللجوء من خلال القصص المصورة. تتناول طبعا منطقتنا بالأخص. هالعام ضيوفنا الأعزاء جايين من مختلف بلدان العالم، من الجزائر، من مصر، وبنأهل فيهم كلهم، من تونس، من سوريا، من لبنان، كمان من الولايات المتحدة، أمريكية، إنجلترا، ألمانيا، إيران وفرنسا وساوث كوريا مستر جونيون بارك and South Korea. كما تعرفوا الندوة هي جزء من عدة نشاطات، وهذا اللي بس بدي أقوله إنه عنا كثير من الفنانين اللي هن موجودين اليوم وغيرهم مش موجودين رح يكون شغلهم معروض بالمعرض اللي رح يفتتح يوم الاثنين الساعة 4:30 ببيت بيروت، المركز الثقافي والمتحف ذاكرة بيروت، اللي فيها بيعرض 38 فنان 370 صفحة كوميكس. So it's a huge exhibition، معرض كبير كتير متعلق بالشرائط المصورة وتحت نفس العنوان اللي هي نزوح وطلب اللجوء. الباقي مش مهم. طبعا الكلمة نسينا نقول الكلمة رح تقدمها رح تكون مالي كراب أبل and I'll say this in English. The opening of the exhibition on Monday is going to be starting with the opening talk by Molly Crabapple, who's coming from the States particularly for this, and she's a journalist and a comics and graphic novel writer. She recently wrote Brothers of the Gun with a Syrian refugee, and is to great acclaim. So اليوم البرنامج مقسم لأربع panels. حلقات المترجم الفوري تبعي هون 4 حلقات. الدورة الأولى حتكون 4 عم بيقدموا كل واحد أو وحدة لحالها، وبعدين عنا بريك صغير قهوة يلي هي حيكون 4 فنانين قاعدين وحوار معهم عن شغلهم بهذا المجال ودورهم كرسامين بموضوع. وهذا المعرض اللي رح يكون ببيت بيروت اسمه In Transit أو ترانزيت بالعربي. رح بلش هلا أقدم السبيكرز العظيمين تبعولنا. أول شيء تحت the next panel. I'll do it. Sorry. Okay, this was the محمود كحيل Awards اللي رح تكون جائزة محمود كحيل يوم الاثنين الساعة 6 ببيت بيروت بعد الافتتاح المعرض. أول شو قلنا؟ مهم بانل حلقة هي عن أفق وتأثير الروايات المصورة اللي بتتناول النزوح والمنفى. Okay, in English it is our first panel will be on the landscape and impact of graphic narratives of displacement and exile. And our first speaker is Mr. George Khouri. The title of his talk is Displaced Region, Graphic Narratives of Untold Stories. George Khouri, Jad, is a renowned Lebanese comics artist and critic. I don't need to read this. He authored several articles about articles that in-depth study and research about comics from the region, which he's quite known for. I will leave him to present himself. He continues to write critically on comics from the region. And he will hook up his computer. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for coming here today. We're very, very happy to have you all here today, all our visitors and our guest speakers, and the wonderful audience who are joining us today. Okay, I don't want to keep breathing. في طفي هاي.
Boom. Okay, it works. Yeah. خلاص شيليها. Okay, good morning. It is not easy for me as an artist who lived a civil war to talk about a neighboring civil war with unprecedented magnitude. It is uncomfortable for me also as a descendant from my mother's side of a genocide and deportation imposed on Greek Christian Orthodox community under the Ottoman Empire during, before, and after the World War, with haunting memories I thought buried forever. Not surprisingly though, comics authors have always addressed civil war, displacement, and genocide issues. Most of us know Art Spiegelman's graphic novel, Mouse, where the author interviewed his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor. Many of us also are familiar with the work of Joe Sacco, the other American comics artist and narrator who went to front lines of disturbed areas of conflicts, such as the Balkans, and his related publications, Gorazde, The Fixer, and The Journalist. But Joe Sacco is mostly known in our region for his epic entitled Palestine, digging into the roots of wars, displacement, occupation, colonization that the Palestinian people endure, setting the standard of what we call nowadays Bede reportage. He was a pioneer in approaching issues related to our region, where it took others 2 decades to follow his footsteps and disclose stories about global violence, mass migrations in our modern history. In the last few years, a new wave of graphic novels related to the above issues emerged in the comics market. Maybe the Syrian ongoing tragedy was the trigger behind such awakening. It could be also a pure coincidence that in Europe, and since 2014, a major focus on the centennial commemoration of the First World War took place. Funds were spent into publications and comic books especially related to that era, where some of the most dramatic and violent events reshaped our region. Publishers unleashed, without knowing, demons from the past through the voices and the perspectives of those who suffered the consequences. It could also be related that the new Bede reportage genre is gaining ground within the graphic novels audience, looking for more real stories rather than fantasy fictions, pushing the comics authors into fields they never looked at before, reporting, investigating big issues in graphical narrative forms. What these voices point at in common is the theme of remembrance. When asked about the Holocaust, Hitler answered, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" 100 years later, authors, not all Armenians, revisited the remains of history in an attempt to engrave in the minds of young generations stories and graphical content so they never forget. Metz Yegren, in 2015, or The Great Crime as referred to within the Armenian diaspora, falls under this category. It might not be the first graphic novel, but definitely the one that depicted the cruelest scenes that ISIS nowadays might look tolerant in comparison to the absurdity of violence that it depicts. Highly documented, it became one of the visual references of the genocide. Le Cahier à Fleurs, 2012, another graphic novel, put the Armenian question in modern context. It tries to be less violent with a romance story in the background, defending a more conciliatory attitude towards the present, although stopping short at the idea of forgiveness. With an attempt of reconciliation, 2 graphic novels were published in the same year of 2015. Commemorating the event, Le Fantôme Arménien, an account of the visit of an Armenian activist to Turkey, accompanied by The Ghost of the Past, the reaction of the public to his exhibition portraying photos of the genocide. And Varto, the story of a young Turk country boy, Hassan, whose father asks him on his dying bed to escort 2 little Armenian kids, Varto and Mariam, to a safe place to escape the genocide. Varto was safe, but Mariam couldn't cross the river. And to save her, Hassan stayed with her on the other side and married her afterward to protect her. Years later, the descendants meet in France, but the wounds were so deep to heal. If the Armenian genocide is alive today in our memories, other tragedies are barely remembered, such as the atrocities endured by the Greek Christian Orthodox community under the Ottomans before, during, and after World War I. Solup in Ayvali, 2015, went in a quest to collect oral history related to the tragedy under which 1.5 million Greeks were forced out of their lands, and most of them died in the process of deportation. Many Turkish families were deported under the same agreement. Although most of the book narrates untold historic accounts, Solup focused rather on the present, especially after a friendship started between him and a Turkish family touring the same city. But the weight of history and remembrance is heavier than any reconciliation. Today, when we look towards Asia Minor, we wonder what the Turks are doing in our ports, Solup told his new Turkish friend, and received a quick reply, "We also wonder what the Greeks are doing in our lands in Anatolia." Remembrance means also keeping the memory of the places and not only narration of the events. According to which side you are on, places change their names. Therefore, it's common that original names of places surface again in collective memories. Ayvali or Kidonies, two names of the same idea and place. In Greek, it is the quince fruit, and in Turkish, the place where the fruit grows in. The same goes between Smyrna versus Izmir. The international community is more familiar nowadays with the appellation of Kobani rather than Ain Arab. The land of Rojava, the west of Kurdistan, rather than north of Syria. The same goes for sure for cities, dozens of cities in occupied Palestine where the Jewish nomination overcome the Arabic ones. Deportation leaves behind unsolved issues. The major one is the identity crisis lived by the descendants. Les Pieds Noirs à la Mer, 2013, et Le Petit-Fils d'Algérie, 2015, are accounts of the deportation of more than 1 million of French Algerian-born families after the independence in 1962. In the first graphic novel, Daniel ran away and took refuge at his grandparents who live in Marseille. In Algeria, the grandpa was a French dentist, married Louise, a native Jew. Yet the grandfather is anti-Semitic, and the grandmother hates Algerians but speaks only Arabic. The cousin is going to marry a Muslim Arab. The book depicts the family account that is still anchored in the events of the past, with a mixture of racism, its contradictions, and paradox. In the second case, Joel Alessandra asks himself a legitimate question. Were his grandparents exploiters, racists, or slavers? Were they close to the OAS? They left everything overnight, ruminating forever deep and legitimate resentment against this country, its inhabitants, and of course the de Gaulle. In 2013, armed with his passport and a visa, and by the indispensable guide on the spot, Joel goes for the first time to Constantine, city of his family. He is ready to face his fears and doubts. The book traces this journey, similar to that of thousands of families, and if it clears the confusion of the past in his head, it deepened the confusion of Joel's emotions towards his family tragedy. A perfect sample of autobiographical work of constructed identity is Michel Stanjowski's graphic novel Toutes les Mères. The book is divided into chapters collecting her ancestors' backgrounds through her mother's memoirs. The evacuation on Greek boats of her Italian grandmother, Maria Caftaro, with her single child, Emilia, among 250,000 people during the infamous Smyrna Grand Fire of 1922. From Piraeus in Greece, she meets her Italian second husband. They move to Beirut. In Beirut, Emilia meets Mikhail, the son of a Russian general killed in the Civil War, and who himself escaped with tens of thousands of people the Bolshevik persecution and landed by boats in Turkish Gallipoli, and from there moved to Beirut. Emilia and Mikhail meet in Beirut, where Vera, her mother, is born. Michel's father, originally from Istanbul, but from Polish origins, Stanjowski, ended up in Beirut, where he fell in love with Vera, and tada, here comes Michel. Trust me, don't worry, it took me several readings so I can grasp the family tree of Michel Stanjowski. Michel embraced the complexity of her ethnic and cultural backgrounds, like any third generation of migrants who ended up in Lebanon. Speaking about identity, if Lebanese identity is defined by a multicultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds, Michel is more attached to her constructed identity than others, embracing her native country and refusing to leave it despite the horrors of the Civil War. The search for identity backgrounds becomes more difficult when faced with the silence of the elderly who lived the event and moved on. Si je t'oublie Alexandrie, Si je t'oublie Alexandrie 2018 reopens the case of thousands of Egyptian European communities who were forced to leave Egypt under the rise of the Arabic nationalist ideology in the 50s, and in this case, the Egyptian Jewish community after the 1948 Israeli-Arab War. Fully integrated in his French environment, Jeremy Dresse tries to investigate the whole history behind his grandparents' immigration, a journey that took him from Alexandria to Tel Aviv and back to Paris to end up with a heavy weight of remorse that his grandfather, an old communist activist, dissipates with the closing sentence, "Who cares, after all? This is a very, very old history." Le Silence de Lounès, 2013, retraced the reverse path of the identity quest. Noureddin couldn't deal with his father's silence regarding the motives of his immigration to France after the independence of Algeria. Thinking that his father was a pied noir and therefore a traitor, he goes back to Algeria to join the Islamic extremists. At the end of his journey, Noureddin discovers that his father was a prominent free fighter, a kind of a national hero who fled to France to escape the persecution against the Kabyle, Berber, population by the new Arab leaders in power. It is the reverse path, negating the newly acquired identity to reclaim the original one and the deception that comes afterward. Ironically, the past meets with the present too in our region. Instead of digging into history of the region, some authors went to report about actual tragedies. Kobani Calling in 2016 is the most influential graphic novel from the front line. Zero Kalkari, the artist, took the road from Mosul in Iraq to Erbil, Kurdistan, to the Turkish-Syria borders, and finally to reach the Kurdish Rojava region. He reported for months to the account of the Italian newspaper Liberazione, with sarcasm, black humor, but also sadness and bitterness about the heroic fight and resistance by Kurdish women fighters facing alone ISIS in its highest moment of glory in Kobani. During the course of the narrative, Zero Kalkari depicts tragic stories of persecution and deportation of the Kurdish population throughout our modern history. Speaking of reporting, what makes comics unique as a genre is that it can represent visually the essence of situation that a documentary or a photograph or an essay can do. Our heart is there. From this roof, we took over the whole Kobani meter by meter. And what strength must this woman have to bear the weight of the wreckage of all this humanity? Or what the wise man of the village always repeats, rightfully, to the author. This is Derek Martai's symmetry. What you find here is worth more than 1,000 essays on geopolitics. Two remarkable graphic works stand out by choosing to go personal and intimate. Instead of collecting stories about immigration, the Tunisian collective Lab 619 chose a more artistic and personal approach, what gave each artist the freedom of expressing himself or herself. Al-Hijra is one of the most powerful poetic and personal narration, of the theme with powerful visual representation. In parallel, Amour Minuscule tells a love story between an Argentinian young girl, Iris, and a Syrian university student, Ismail. He has to leave to Syria where the communication is lost. During this forced separation, Iris discovers that she's pregnant while Ismail is fighting to return home. Once reunited, the difficulty for Ismail to overcome his trauma leaves the relationship open to an unknown ending. It's truly a displaced region. From the mountains of Sinjar in Iraq to the forgotten lands of South of Sudan, graphic novels were the only medium where artists visually recreated untold accounts of persecution, deportation, atrocities committed by terrorist groups or governmental militias. A true displaced region. From refugee camps in Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, the unwelcomed immigrants camps in Europe, artists volunteered to go, witness, defend, and collect stories of people with names, coming from villages and cities that have names, running away from torturers who have names, awaiting for an unknown future. Artists from Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, Algeria, France, Great Britain, United States, Italy, Germany, and all over the world, narrating the stories of thousands of people coming out of history books, from the streets of Damascus, down the Iraqi mountains, or crossing the Libyan desert to perish in the Mediterranean Sea, or to be stopped at the border of civilization. Through these artists, names like Modaya Mam, Salima, Haytham, Nuruddin, Zanubia, and thousands. Sorry. Won't be forgotten. Thank you. Sorry.
Is it the emotions of the... Well... I think they won't be forgotten because of your talk. So it is a very emotional topic, I think, and something very difficult to deal with. We have among us also artists who are displaced and talking about it. So thank you, Jad, for your talk, and sorry to put you through that. Our next speaker is Mr. Olivier. Okay, no? Mr. Olivier Kugler. He is a reportage illustrator from Germany. He, as you can see, his beautiful work is here. He's the author of Escaping Wars and Waves, Encounters with Syrian Refugees. It is a beautiful book that won the jury prize of the European Design Award. And I think he'll be speaking about it today. He's also the award winner, the Association of Illustrators Gold Award winner in 2018. And in 2004 and 2012, the V&A Illustration Award in 2011. I think I mixed those dates a little bit. Anyway, please welcome Olivier Kugler. Kugler. Oh, sorry.
Hello. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me to Beirut. It's my first time here. I feel very honored and to have the privilege to present my work to you here. And I was commissioned by Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, in 2013, at the end of 2013, to go to Domi's refugee camp in Iraqi Kurdistan in order to do research in the camp, but with the aim to create drawings documenting the circumstances of Syrian refugees living in the camp. So in December 2013, I went to the camp. It was winter, it was snowing, it was raining. It were quite extreme weather, and I spent 2 weeks in the camp talking with people, taking reference photos, conducting interviews. And Médecins Sans Frontières, they commissioned me to do drawings with the aim to create drawings helping to raise awareness of the situation of the people living in the camp. The drawings were supposed to get exhibited at the Fumetto Comic Book Festival in Lucerne, and also hopefully to get published in magazines and newspapers internationally. So the people living in Domis, in the camp, I think 99% of them are from the Kurdish part of Syria, from the Kamishli region. And I spent time with the MSF's mental health team. You can see Hala here in the center. She's a psychotherapist. She's from Lebanon, from Beirut. And all her team members, they are Syrian Kurds, also refugees, working with her. And Hala told me about the difficulties of reaching the people living in the camp. I can read out a little bit for you from what she told me. She said, we do have a barrier here between the camp's residents and the mental health department. Syrians in general were not used to visiting a psychologist for therapy sessions. If they sought help, they usually went to see the doctor who would prescribe the medication. I prefer not to wait in our clinic for the patients to come and see us. They might never come. This is a difficult undertaking, though. You know the mentality of the men here. They say, I'm a man, I'm strong, I don't need this mental health stuff. Ahin, psychotherapist from Damascus, told me then, for women too, the idea of seeing a psychotherapist is something they don't feel comfortable with. We had women who were using their babies as a cover to come here in order to get mental health support. They tell their community that there's a problem with the baby and that they have to go to the health center. Nihat, a mental health worker, told me, one man told me that he had to walk on the bodies of dead people. And You can see on the following spread, you get introduced to Ahin, who you saw earlier on the page, on the previous spread. And she's from Damascus originally, and she told me they lived in a neighborhood where the Free Syrian Army moved in, and the Syrian army started to shell the neighborhood, and so they had to leave this neighborhood. They moved to a different part of Damascus, but then her husband was supposed to get drafted into the Syrian army. He didn't want to serve his military service, so they fled to Iraqi Kurdistan. The first day they went to Kamishli, to the capital of the Kurdish part of Syria, where the family is originally from. But then they moved to Iraqi Kurdistan to find refuge in a Domis camp. So when they arrived in the camp, Ahin felt ill. So she went to see a doctor, and the doctor told her that she's pregnant. She's going to have a baby, and her first thought was, I don't want to have a baby in a refugee camp. But then she said, the happiest day of my life was when Kawa, my baby boy, was born. He's 7 months old now. I don't see any future for us here. We would love to go back to Kamishli, where my parents are. They haven't met my grandson yet, or they haven't met their grandson yet. Every night before I put Kawa to bed, I hold him in my arms, tell him how beautiful Syria is, and that one day we will go back there, where we'll all have a beautiful life. We listen to music, which reminds me of my time as a student in Damascus. And Ahin is in Germany now. She found refuge there. Ahmed is from Kamishli originally. He told me that he didn't flee the war because of the fighting, but he had to leave the Kamishli region because he couldn't find work anymore. He used to work as an agricultural laborer on farms. He couldn't get work anymore, so he's got a large family, he's poor, so he had to leave the country because because of the war, all the kind of the prices, the inflation went up. So he, when I met him, he was just about to repair the roof of the shelter he built himself with corrugated iron, and he had a leak. Lots of water was coming into the rainwater was coming into their tent, and I was spent maybe half an hour or 40 minutes with him in his shelter, where he told me about his situation, and I met his kids and his wife. His wife told me that she's ill. She thinks she's going to die soon, and she would love to go back to the house they used to have. They all miss their little house, their garden where they used to grow fruit and vegetable. The little girl told me that she misses the rabbits and her friends. And the little boy told me he wants to become a teacher. Ahmed said that when I told him that I'm from Germany, he mentioned his cousin who's been living in Germany for a long time. And he asked me if I could help him to go to Germany because he would love to go there, take his family there. And of course, I can't help him with that. While I was conducting the interview with the family, I noticed that there was a movement going on underneath the blankets of you can see on the mattress here, and I saw a teenage boy looking out at me, and I don't know why he was hiding from me. And later on, one of the people working for MSF told me that he was probably embarrassed because he is a teenager and he didn't want to be seen in this situation by a stranger. So he was hiding. Muhammad is from Damascus. He told me that he also lived in a neighborhood that was getting bombarded by the Syrian army. He told me they were having, I think it was lunch or dinner one day, and they could hear a helicopter approaching the neighborhood. It was coming closer and closer. And all of a sudden, he said, we all need to leave the house now, immediately. So the whole family and all the other people in the house, they left the building. They were running outside, and they could see a helicopter hovering above the building, and it just dropped a barrel bomb on their house. So, and the whole house with all their belongings got destroyed from 1 second to the other. So Muhammad told me he's got several teenage daughters, and he didn't want to spend a single night in Damascus with the war going on. He was afraid about them. So they went on the next bus, leaving Damascus, going to Kamishli, where the family's from, and they could spend some time with the family of his wife. But they're also from a poor family, and they couldn't afford to overstay their welcome, so they paid a smuggler to take them over the border to Iraqi Kurdistan. And Muhammad started to cry when I asked him about how they're coping in the camp. He started to talk about his wife, and he said, "My wife is not coping well with adapting to our new lives. She's very depressed, and there's no medication available." Habib is also, he's from Aleppo, I think. And he told me that when I told him I'm an illustrator, he said that he wanted to become an illustrator when he was a little boy, and he used to be the best draftsman in his class. He mentioned that he took part as a child in a drawing competition that was launched by the Children's Book Fair in Bologna in Italy. And apparently he was selected by the jury to present his work, his drawing. He was invited to go to Bologna by the jury to show his work there. And he was so excited when he heard that. And when he told me that, I couldn't believe him, because I remember that I took part in this competition as well when I was a small boy in Germany, and I didn't win, so I was never chosen to go there. So he was super excited to go there, and but because he's a Kurd, he's from a minority. Many Kurdish people in Syria, they never got a passport. So all his father could give him was his birth certificate on a sheet of paper. So he showed it to the head of the school, and he said, I want to go to Bologna. And he just looked at the head of the school, he just looked at the certificate, and he looked at the boy, and he smacked the boy with the paper around his face and said, "You're not even a proper Syrian. You won't be able to go because you don't have a passport." And I think this meeting Habib resonated with me a lot, because I'm an illustrator, and I'm very lucky, very privileged to make a living as an illustrator. It's my dream job. But I got a lot of support from my parents, from the training I received in Germany. I got 2 scholarships to go to America and to improve my work. So it was very kind of sad for me to hear about Habib's circumstances. And I don't know, how are we doing with the time? 5 minutes, okay. Yeah, I do all my drawings from photo reference. When I was in the camp, I took lots of photos of the people. You can see some photos of Habib in his workshop. He's repairing television sets that he is selling to other people living in the camp. And I take thousands of reference photos that I use. And this is a sketch I sent to Harper's Magazine, who published some of the drawings in America. And so these drawings were published in America and internationally, and I was very excited about that. And 1.5 years later, I got a second commission by Doctors Without Borders to go to Kos Island to do the same, to meet Syrians arriving on Kos Island on their way to Northern Europe. This is Rezan. He's a fashion designer from the city of Kobani. And you probably all know that the city was kind of occupied by ISIS, and there was a battle that was mentioned earlier. And he witnessed a battle with other people who left the city. They were on the mountaintop at the Turkish border, and they could see how the city was shelled by American and other air forces. And Rezan was one of the first people after the city was liberated who came into town, and he went back to his house, and he was so relieved to see that his house was fine. He entered the house, but he could see that troops of ISIS, they were living in his house, and they destroyed, he's a fashion designer, they destroyed all his artwork, and they kind of put graffiti on the walls, and he thought, that's fine, I'm alive, all my friends are alive, my family is well. But then he went into the garden, and he could see the neighbor's garden. It was a big orchard, there were many trees of apple trees, orange trees, and he could see that ISIS, they blew up all the trees, they dynamited the trees, and this is when he had a breakdown, and he told me that he thinks it's worse to destroy a tree than a house, because you can rebuild a house, but a tree takes decades to grow. And yeah, you can see some more reference photos here and a sketch I sent to the art director. And Rezan told me that the only thing he took from his house was this set of watercolors. And he didn't dare to touch anything in the house or to kind of open doors, because he was afraid that there are booby traps lying there. So I need to hurry up, sorry. I also went to Calais, where I met Syrians. Amar, he made the way, he's in England now. And I just want to finish the presentation with showing drawings I did of a Syrian family from Deir ez-Zor who came all the way to Germany, and they found refuge in the Simotheim. It's the small village in the Black Forest where I'm from, where I grew up in. And my family, my father and my mother, and other locals, they help Syrian refugees with kind of with all the paperwork and finding a new life in the village. So when I visited my parents over Christmas, my little son Jack, he's 5 years old, and we visited the family. We spent some time with them. They told us about their new lives in Germany. It is difficult for the parents to adapt, because it's really difficult to learn the language, but the children, they're fine. They speak German almost perfectly, just after 1.5 years there. And one morning I joined Noor and Saad on their walk to school, and what makes me very happy, they go to the same school now that I used to go to when I was a little boy. So yeah. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Olivier, for your very moving presentation regarding your work, but also what you encountered and how you talked to the refugees. Our next speaker is Malou Halassa. She is a writer and editor. Her debut novel, Mother of All Pigs, was published in 2017. She was managing editor of Prince Claus Fund Library, Tank Magazine, and Portal 9. She covers a wide-ranging list of subjects, from water as occupation in Palestine to Syrian comics during the present-day conflict. Please welcome Malou.
Would you like to start with the presentation?
I'll just explain that more detailed biographies are in the beautiful little booklet. So please, if you would like to look further into they're here.
Because I'm an editor, I'm going to show you some images, but really, I'd like you to touch the books that I'm talking about. And Olivier, do you mind if you have your book to pass around too? Once I heard you were coming, I left your book at home. Let's start with books, because that's what I'm about. That's what I believe in. I'm terrible with screens. I apologize, but yeah. And what's interesting about the presentations that we're hearing today is that from Jan's presentation, I really see how much the tradition of bande dessinée in France and in Belgium, That's really what's fueling this wealth of very interesting work, comics work about displacement and migration, forced migration. Whereas in the West, in the English language, other than Olivier, there are a handful of artists that are doing it because comics is not the kind of, it doesn't have that deep tradition in British culture, but we'll talk about that. So I'm not going to show you my work. I'm going to just talk about other people's work. This is a cover from Thi Bui, her graphic novel about being a Vietnamese refugee in the US and coming with her family. The novel, The Best We Could Do, was her family story that took her a decade to write. And one of the reasons why it took her a decade to write was that she, as a graduate student, she was researching experience, the Vietnamese experience in America, the Vietnam War, and she said that all she could find when she was a graduate student was that the material was American-centric, male-centric, and soldier-centric. Her comments resonated with me because I come from an extended Jordanian, mainly Jordanian family in Akron, Ohio. My mother's Filipino. And when I was growing up in the American Midwest and eventually moved to Britain in the 1980s, the available research material on the Middle East was dominated by academic or political tomes. These had a similar bent to those which confronted Bui. American, male-centric, from the American point of view, but it was male-centric. Okay, it wasn't the American soldier at war except in Iraq, but it was war after war, conflict after conflict. And it always seemed to me that Western analysts were more interested in figuring out the winners so the governments could woo Western governments could woo the next dictator. The great fictional canon from the region, which had been translated into English, was also male-dominated, with the odd feminist or marginal voice thrown in. Interestingly, in an area of the world filled with draconian regimes, almost non-existent was prison memoir. I remember in the late 1990s looking in London for Arab cartoons for a book I was editing for the Prince Claus Fund. All I found was a single book of criticism published by, of all places, the University of Indiana Press. It was called Arab Comic Strips, Politics of an Emerging Mass Market by Alan Douglas, but also Fedwa Multi-Douglas, who won a big humanitarian award in the US. So that was the only book that I could reference. And then I also found a catalog of pan-Arab editorial cartoons from an exhibition put on by a Saudi newspaper. Since London was the capital of Arab cartoonists in exile, as Paris was for North African cartoonists fleeing their own governments. It would be another decade before the research situation changed. To be honest, the underground culture has always been here in the region, but for us over there in the West, it suddenly became visible, in part because of the internet, but probably it would not have made the impact it did if not for the mass demonstrations of 2011, which gave a shape and a voice to a generation for the most part ignored by Western analysts. So many people, so many academics told me in London, so many people I knew that were lecturing and working in the field, how the Arab Spring / Arab Awakenings completely surprised them. Throughout my own work, I've been looking for notions of the Arab family which didn't have to necessarily conform to the same mixed experience I had, but at least I was looking for something that interrogated patriarchal, social, and religious structures surrounding the family. The terrorist has always had taken center stage in Western conceptions of the region, while the Arab family has been for the most part ignored and invisible. Again, it would be a war that would tip the balance another way. Because of the Syrian conflict, a new crop of graphic novels have at their center the Arab family in flux. The first a title that I want to talk about is Brothers of the Gun, a memoir of the Syrian war. And it was, this memoir was born out of a very powerful relationship between Syrian activist and writer Marwan Hisham in Raqqa, a native son of Raqqa, al-Raqqa, and the activist illustrator Molly Crabapple in New York City. Originally, Crabapple drew scenes of Raqqa during Daesh's occupation of the city from photographs that Hisham sent to her surreptitiously. These were published in Vanity Fair and began a trend of engaged illustration that's I think pretty much, it's rare in mainstream US publications. So there was a ground opening up that Molly opened and also Olivier opened to with his work. Molly Crabapple, as Lena said, will be with us on Monday. But until then, I wanted to sort of, I don't know how much people do know her work, but I wanted to show some of her early work. When I was doing a book called Syria Speaks, Art and Culture from the Front Line, her work at that time was very influential in terms of how I was looking at new visual culture coming out of the Syrian Revolution, because it was showing us something that we don't normally get to see, because there was like a news blackout from that when IS was there. Hold on, I lost my place. And also, this work, she was showing through Hisham's photographs, she was showing a displacement of a people who were still living in a town that changed around them. It was a different kind of displacement where the physical plant might have been the same, but the meaning of what constituted public space had been radically altered. In Brothers of the Gun, it is Hisham's description of his family and of his two friends, which give a fuller picture of how a town as conservative and religious as al-Raqqa produced a generation of rebels. The second book I'm interested in looking at is Threads from the Refugee Crisis by Kate Evans. And it is a graphic novel that documents the artists working in the jungle, the refugee camp of Calais that was brutally closed in 2017 after a mere 21 months in operation. The families she shows are fractured or extended, rarely nuclear, heavily mixed with the nationalities of people fleeing Asia and Africa, men, women, children, the dispossessed, the depressed, and at times the heavily pregnant. The third book that I was interested in is Unwanted, Stories of the Syrian Refugees, written and illustrated by Dawn Brown, which really charts the movement of Syrians on the move, refugees on the move through a hostile and brutal Europe. And it's here I kind of want to digress, and I want to talk about form. Since 2015, there have been hundreds of thousands of images still and moving, showing forced migration and displacement. Yet not even the disturbing image of a 3-year-old washed up on a Greek beach was not enough to really dent, and some would say it even fueled the hysteria of the hard right in Europe and the US. I've been kind of wondering about this. Like, how come all this like documentary imagery, right? How come that wasn't enough to spur international governments? How come this wasn't solved? Why was it that armies were, navies were involved and boats were confiscated, but the actual crisis was not, tackled head on? And I wonder, for me, I was wondering that I don't think it was a failure of the imagery, but perhaps a failure of the delivery of the imagery in short articles that no one has the patience to read on the internet, or in picture essays, and our press in London now or in other places becoming quite thin. So it really, we had to rely on other forms of storytelling for a wider view on this crisis to come to the fore. And it really is this, I feel that in graphic novels, in illustrated memoirs, you have like a much broader, wider, deeper space to really look at the range and depth of human emotion and experience. I mean, the imagery that Olivier was showing us, the detail in the not only what people are saying, but how this story or how this scene is fully not described, because in part it is their own words, but how you get a full sense even of someone hiding under the blankets. And I think that's something that somehow, it's that kind of real-life narrative that we're missing in a lot of the media that we're getting today. And how that can be fixed, I don't know. Let's move on. In Britain during the World Wars, there's always been a tradition of illustrators drawing conflict. Even avant-garde artists alongside painters known for society portraiture, like John Singer Sargent, were sent to draw the trenches. In the graphic novel Threads from the Refugee Crisis by Kate Evans, she herself appears in the book, and she is showing what she does in the jungle as a character. So it's through her eyes that we feel the outrage. She tells stories of the people there, but she pops up to sort of give us an idea of how, sort of, I don't know, the illustrator as a medium to sort of channel that emotion and kind of tell us how we should feel. Alongside her experiences, the book is divided in chapters, but each chapter sort of begins with like a picture of a mobile phone and text. And these are comments from people who have sent her anti-immigration or anti-refugee messages. So her graphic novel is as much about the people in the jungle attempting to get to the UK as it is about the people who believe that they shouldn't be there. Now, Dawn Brown is a well-known illustrator for children and young adults, and there's a real simplicity of line in his graphic novel, and I feel that in parts it's very cinematic. However, the graphic novel, his novel, comes into its own at the end of the book with the research and source material, an extensive bibliography and geographical notes of what Brown's looking at, where he went, where he drew. His activism shows up, one could say, in his subject matter. It is a book that teachers could use in class, a trend in the US that even the New York Times and Brown University, they're preparing these teachers' packs that people can use in classrooms. And the New York Times is doing that really because of, that it was an article that they ran by Jake Halpern and Michael Sloan called The New World, Welcome to the New World, about a Syrian refugee family. And so this material is becoming more widespread. But I really feel that this visibility of this kind of material would not have gained mainstream acceptance if not for this new engaged drawing and activism of Molly Crabapple and Olivier, and they're setting a high bar. In Molly's work, in Crabapple's work from Syria and Iraq, among other countries, her subjects themselves are not only what makes her work engaged, her illustration, and Olivier's too, provides a platform for other voices without mediation, too much mediation from the illustrators, what they're thinking, how they interpret it. It's their line that tells us what's going on. And at the end of The Wanted by Dawn Brown, he reveals in pointed statistics that there are nearly 6 million registered Syrian refugees in the world, and as of April last year, the US has taken 11. This paltry figure emphasizes why graphic novels and illustrated memoirs remain so important to modern narratives of displacement, dislocation, and loss today. Graphic novels and comic strips by activist illustrators and graphic artists lay bare the full human cost of the tragedy in a region of the world, in a region and the rest of the world that seems to be continually at war. with drawing and reporting that takes place close to the ground. As people grow bored with the real and believe that the news can't be trusted, drawing and illustration, not photography, film, or news broadcast, or rolling news, are worth more than 1,000 words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malou. Thank you, Malou, for that very inspiring talk and very true. Our next speaker is Jonathan Geyer. Jonathan, other than I'll present him, but I'd also like to mention that he lived in Cairo, and that's where we met at the Cairo Comics Festival. Jonathan was a speaker at our first symposium on personal narratives, so we're very welcome you back here again. Jonathan Geyer is an independent journalist. From 2017 to 18, he served as a Radcliffe Institute Fellow at Harvard University. Jonathan has written for Guernica, Harper's Bazaar, Los Angeles Review of Books, Le Monde Diplomatique, The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, the Rolling Stones, the Paris Review, so he's been writing a lot. Before I bring Jonathan in, I'm sorry for this interruption, several of whom Malou have presented will be featured in our exhibition, including Jake Halpern and Michael Sloan, with their a portion of their work, which was on the Welcome to the New World Frontiers. So do come, please welcome Jonathan Geyer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. It's really an honor to be here among so many artists and practitioners, and thank you to the Sawaf Arabic Comics Initiative. So today I want to talk about how Exile has been an integral component of Egyptian and Arab cartooning since its origins. Now, cartooning, caricature, children's literature emerged in Egypt in a moment of cosmopolitanism, that is, the turn of the 20th century, when minorities and émigrés were pioneers of the form. And so displacement is intimately tied to the story of Arab comic artists. Looking at the work of cartoonists in exile offers provocations, I hope, for our current moment. So I'll speak of an Egypt that was once home to refugee seekers, and in conclusion, I'll discuss a country that now pushes artists to leave. So the tradition of the caricaturist in exile begins with James Sanua, or Yaqub Sanu, who was born in 1839. The Egyptian, Syrian, Italian, Jewish dramatist and journalist launched his magazine Abu Nadara in 1877. It was this two-page leaflet, almost like a zine, like we'd see today. And in satirical plays and polemical columns, he rallied against the economic injustices of the moment, the British colonial enterprise. And Sanua claimed to have been physically threatened by the Khedive court's goons, so he boarded a ship for Marseille in June 1878. Interestingly, the scholar Adam Mestian notes in a valuable article that there's little evidence besides Sanua's own story and his own claims that he was threatened. And I think this is true of so many stories of expatriation, that it's personal, not public, that those fleeing abroad often face speculation of whether the threats are real or not. 2 months later, Sanua was in France, where he published 28 installments of Abu Nadara's journey from victorious Egypt to splendorous Paris, his first publication with caricatures. Certainly, this might have had something to do with the more advanced printing technologies in France. It would be difficult to publish drawings when he began in Egypt. But abroad, Sanua turned to new satirical and artistic innovations. And over the next 3 decades, caricatures were always on the front and back of his publications, which were banned in Egypt. And I want to note that Egypt had an outsized role in his life throughout his publications for decades. He drew about the Arab and Muslim world from Europe. And in the years that followed, Egypt developed a vibrant illustrated press, bright publications, affordable to many, and coincided with the loosening of censorship. Now, cartooning was a new art form, according to a 1925 article, which suggests that there may not have been enough cartoonists to go around. The editor of this theater magazine said they could find no able cartoonist in Egypt. So they asked the Turkish cartoonist Rivki Bey to join them at a theater show to draw the actors. Now, we don't know much about Rivki Bey or his brother Shaw'i, except that they worked for the Ottoman Sultan and had fallen out of favor in Ataturk's new republic. They moved to Cairo and jumped on the new trend of caricature in all the smartest publications. But very little else is known about them, and if you know, you can please tell me. But it fits a larger trend of Cairo as a meeting place of migrant artists. Indeed, some of the foremost cartoonists and caricaturists of the early press had come from abroad. So when it was first started in 1925, the Syrian actress Rosel Youssef started a publication of the same name that was meant to be an arts magazine and quickly jumped into vicious parliamentary politics. She and her team of journalists faced off against ministers, royals, the British, and made caricature the publication's trademark. And hers is a rags to riches story. She arrived in Alexandria penniless at the age of 14, joined a theater troupe, and rose to stardom in Cairo's answer to Broadway. She herself, perhaps the most influential woman journalist in the history of the Arab world, spent her whole life away from her homeland. And it's in this moment of rollicking parliamentary politics, a tenuous British occupation, a politically active populace, that cartoonists maybe had the most impact in Cairo. Which brings us to Juan Santos, a Spanish painter who the Egyptian prince Yusuf Kamil invited to establish the first fine arts college in Zamalek in Cairo in 1908. And as an aside, he was a teacher to Mahmoud Mukhtar, the great sculptor. But he was also one of the earliest cartoonists. Now, I haven't been able to figure out why Santos left Spain for Cairo. All we know is that this exhibition shown here, the king attended in 1927 and posed alongside his humorous critical drawings, as the word cartoons wasn't yet used yet. The Rifki brothers, Santos, they had a huge influence on Cairo. And I wonder if we'll see something similar today in the 21st century as Arab artists are relocating to European and American cities, and they become fixtures drawing in new settings, in their second or third languages, and addressing politics far away from their home country. Now, it wasn't just caricature, but in the following years, the first children's magazines and comics emerged, and many of the key artists came from minority or international backgrounds. According to research by Ahmed Nagy, the Egyptian novelist, Bernie, the artist of Samir's earliest covers, was Jewish, and the same year that this publication started, 1956, he fled to France. There's other lesser-known minority Egyptian artists as part of this movement, like Haroun and Jija Tomassian. But the 1952 Free Officers' Revolt and the explosion of Egyptian nationalism destroyed this cosmopolitan moment and consolidated Egyptian identity into a monolithic one. These artists were no longer welcome. Many contemporary Egyptian critics of the ultra-nationalist camp have written these artists out of history. In 2013, for example, I attended a seminar of the old guard, the Falul cartoonists, we might call them, and they argued that the first Egyptian cartoonist was Racha, who emerged in the 30s, which surprised me because I've just mentioned many artists from before coming from very diverse backgrounds. And perhaps this is why we know so little about their personal stories, because of their complex identities, which contradicted these new nationalisms. Now, the 50s and 60s are often called the golden age of Egyptian caricature, as children's magazines flowered and the Sabah al-Khir school of cartooning took shape. But it was also a time of severe crackdown, and in Nasser's security state, many artists and writers went to prison, but still there were some critical drawings of him in the press. Now, Anwar Sadat's presidency of the 70s through 1981 was even a more expansive clampdown. And it's in this period that I want to focus on, where many cartoonists chose to leave Egypt, the very generation that thrived under Nasser. They had to leave the country to take radical stands against Sadat's failure in the 73 war with Israel and his subsequent pursuit of a peace treaty, the Camp David Accords. Cartoonists couldn't criticize this, the president, or the treaty in the press. So they would rather stick to their principles than stay silent. Exile can be an opportunity to regroup, to create new solidarity. The cartoonist and virtuoso Mohiuddin Labad, for example, left for Beirut, where he published 67 books in the first year of Dar al-Fatah al-Arabi, the PLO children's publisher. Others, like Georges Bagouri, chose to work abroad, contributing to expat publications in France. Nabil Selmi, a lesser-known artist from the same generation, spent his life in Berlin. Both artists, as well as Naji al-Ali, the famous Palestinian, contributed to a 1977 exhibition at the Arab University in Beirut, quote, in solidarity between Egyptian national forces, the Palestine Revolution, and the Popular Revolution in Iran. As a contemporary article in the journal Lotus noted, works were displayed which dealt with the absence of democracy in Egypt and its ensuing economic and political results, as well as how Camp David was sabotaging Palestine. That is, the exhibition itself was a call for mobilization. A colleague of Labad's, Bahagat Osman, left Egypt for Kuwait for 10 years, apparently fearing retribution for his satire of Sadat. He would only return to the country after Sadat's assassination. In the Gulf, many Egyptian artists helped found new children's publications like Magid. They were given resources and space to produce new forms. And once Osman returned to Cairo, he returned to his bold anti-establishment cartooning. Now, these works were compiled into a 1987 book called, noted here, The Government and Citizens and Their Differences, originally published by El Ahali, the leftist newspaper. In the book, Bahagat's drawings deal with poor people grappling with corruption and the effects of the Mubarak regime. And I wanted to draw out the dedication to the book because I think it's particularly powerful. For the Egyptians in Egypt who are strangers in their country, the headquarters of our expatriate Arab children is in the Arab homeland. So I've been thinking about this dedication for about a year, and I want to propose a new concept of exile, which is exile from within. A broader notion of exile, of those who can't leave their homes, those who are stuck in their cities and who are in their countries, but alienated from their own states. Now, since 2013, artists, writers, critics of all shapes and sizes have been forced to leave Egypt because of General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's severe crackdown. Cartoonists in exile or in self-exile are at risk. Now, I don't want to name or list these people in this presentation because, as I say, they are at risk, but we know many of their names and many of their stories. Some have been very forthcoming about it, like the artist Ganzir, who's drawn very eloquently for the nib about his own narrative, while others are keeping their stories to themselves for now. The choice of the comic artist to take such risks is actually quite similar to that of journalists, and on a daily basis they reckon with the possibility of expulsion. For those who can leave, the world becomes a waiting room until they can return home again. Now, I want to note the assassination of the Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi in October shocked many. And this cartoon by Anwar, for me, really stood out. The image of the pen spilling ink that's almost blood. The Saudi writer's death, the assassination, killing, echoed the 1987 assassination of Naji al-Ali in London, who was also living in exile, whose descent had perhaps gone too far. It mirrored what happened to Ali Ferzat, the Syrian whose story we know so well, who Assad ordered brutalized and who now lives in Kuwait. These, of course, are the most extreme cases, and I think the spectrum of exile encompasses many varied situations And more familiar to me are the stories of young families living in small apartments in cities far from their families, moving on short notice, following visas or residencies or other precarious jobs in Europe or America. For others, it's the banal or the brutal bureaucracies and consulates that cause a huge amount of stress for artists. And those stresses are not often apparent on the page. But I think if you read carefully, you can start to see changes and reflections in their art. And I think the artists who make it out, and they'll be the first ones to tell you, are truly the lucky ones. But the question still remains, where will artists today find security abroad, whether it's financial or otherwise? And the income that supports comic artists is, of course, very limited, as I think many of us know very well. And increasingly, it's through conduits in European cultural organizations, often defined by the so-called human rights agenda, defined by integration, assimilation, celebrating diversity. These are all great things, but they're quite different, I think, than what artists working in their home countries were thinking about or dealing with. And it's a great potential pitfall for the growth of artists in new countries. Will they have to sing for their supper? Will they have to produce works that satisfy Western, European, or American artists, audiences, pardon me? Or will they be able to pursue the works that they want to pursue? Now, unfortunately, there are no Arab nationalist causes or pan-Arab causes uniting artists like Mohiuddin Labad found in the publishing house Dar al-Fatah al-Arabi. Now, in the context of Labad and his friends' vast cultural production of comics, Palestine, of course, was not just Palestine. It was a foil for all of the anti-Sadat sentiment that had boiled over, the anti-government, the anti-establishment sentiment that had made them self-exiles. And invoking Palestine and Arab nationalism, this group used exile as a time to double down on their leftist ideals and to create new projects before they could return. I want to call for a new conceptualization of such solidarity to deal with 21st century displacement. And I want to draw out 3 brief observations from this history, 100 years of history I've just given you in 10 minutes. The first is of Abu Nadara, of James Sanua, who kept grappling with Egypt his entire life, which is to say that displacement does not mean disengagement from political and artistic life or public life, and that Sanua continued to produce Middle East journalism abroad shows that exile is not estrangement. But so many question the legitimacy of his voice, given that he was no longer in the country. So I think we have a responsibility to make sure that voices in exile receive the same hearing as those in country. Second, I think we need to study Egypt itself further as an international cosmopolitan cultural space where Europeans, Turks, and other Arabs sought refuge and contributed to the very comic art form that we love so much, to better understand how today's cities of refuge will contribute to the advancement of new graphic forms. And finally, as suggested by this quote from Bhagat Osman, I think we need to think more broadly about displacement, to include those in country who may not have the choice to leave. One can be alienated, displaced, and banished within one's own home, strangers in one's own country. And just as Bhagat dedicated his book to those, I want to dedicate this presentation to those who continue to work against all odds. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really 100 years of history in 15 minutes, of which I need to ask you many questions, seriously. And I think that final statement also super interesting. And definitely the idea of displaced in your own country, even with Molly Crabapple's work is in Raqqa, is they're displaced in their own hometown and they're still living there and they're grappling with that issue, as well as the twins cartoons here speak about the Aswan Dam that displaced the Nubians. So you're absolutely right. Well, I'd like to invite our 4 speakers to please come. So Malou, Jad, Olivier, Jonathan, Yes, if you could come here, and for our audience, it's open for questions. If you have any questions to our fantastic speakers. Yes, there's my phone. Ooh, let's just check. Can we just make sure the mics are on there? Okay. Hello? Hello, hello. I'll just give you this to pass around when you need it. There's one for the audience. Hiya? Sorry.
What am I going to say?
Sorry.
They're going to ask.
No, this is for audience. If they want to answer. We're ready in case. Hello, hello. I'm not sure. Okay. Hello. We're ready. So don't wait for me. Yes. Thank you. Welcome. I know you don't want a thing, but it's part of the recording, just so people can hear you. Please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentations. I wanted to ask a bit more if you could tell us about the response to such work. Olivier, you did your work with MSF, and then it got published broadly to include all of the missions that you did. Mm-hmm. And Jonathan, you do several talks, and Malou as well, and George, critic, teacher. I mean, in a world where we're constantly overwhelmed with tragedies and information, and Malou, you already raised the issue of a picture that is worth 1,000 words and the effect of such imagery as opposed to something else. So at a time where we're constantly overwhelmed with so much that is happening, how do we still keep up the empathy? Do we still keep up how do we channel such work into more work that creates the change or the disruption that the artists are hoping for, the populations that have been displaced? I guess my question is about, like, where's the hope and the optimism in all of this? Because it's really a lot to take in.
Whoever would like to start. Hello.
I think that there is a greater interest now than there ever was. And I'm curious why that is. Is it really just 9/11 and the Arab Spring or Arab Awakening? Like, what is it? Or has the world really shrunk? The one thing that I have noticed is that as our media kind of falls away, and I'm not saying, I don't believe that's a good thing myself, but as these documentary images fall away, or I think it's really the storytelling, authentic voices, they do count. And that there's something very powerful about in-depth reportage. Now, how that's, I'm wondering myself about illustration and comics and that visual, like telling stories both visually and through words. Why is the impact so great? Is it because we're really getting closer to the people? And I'm very interested in that, like, without that mediation. For the book that I did with Zahra Marina and Nawara Mahfouz Syria Speaks, we really kept that as a platform for those voices. Like, I didn't want to stand, the editors, we didn't want to stand between. We wanted that distance between the reader and the people who are addressing the reader to be very close. How's that done? That's like creative and artistic strategies, but there is more of an interest. But I think that the work that you've seen this morning, it is being done.
Talking about the response to my work, I had a really nice experience when I came back from Domi's refugee camp. I was invited to do work in progress exhibition in in Lucerne, in Switzerland, at the comic book festival at the Fumetto. And I was creating new work in an exhibition space, and I also had work I've done already of Syrians I met in Domis that was hanging on the walls. And it was interesting for me to see how people who look at my work, interact and react to it. And I was there for 3 or 4 days, and I noticed that there was one elderly couple. They came into the exhibition, and they probably spent an hour and in the show, and they looked at all the drawings, they read all the texts. And I'm not used to this process because I publish in magazines and newspapers, and I hardly had any exhibitions before. So it was interesting for me to see how people react to the work. And they came back the next day, and they looked at the work again. And then they approached me and told me they were in the mid-60s, late 60s, and they told me that over the last 40 years they've been seeing so many photos and magazines and newspapers and films in the news about refugees being displaced on the run in distress, and they became really hardened because it doesn't affect. They told me seeing these things in the news at 8 o'clock in the evening doesn't affect them anymore because they've seen so much of it. And they said, but there's something in the drawings that made them reconnect with the people on a different level. And I guess with a comic, with drawings, you can, this is, I guess, a unique medium. I guess you could do this with photography as well, but you can combine pictures with speech bubbles, with text that directly talk to the viewer. And it made me very happy when I heard that, and it gave me also hope that, because when you do this work, you spend I spend maybe 5% of my working time in the field, meeting the people, and then the rest of the time is just sweating, working hard, day and night on the drawings. And then when you get, and you don't know what is happening. If you do a book, you're lucky if you can sell 1,000 books or 1,500, you're already, it's a big success in this business. But then when you see people reacting to your work, and this made me, it was quite an important thing for me to get this feedback.
Jonathan, would you like to add anything? Oh, Jad, sorry, I didn't. Please go ahead, Jad.
No, I think the main question that you asked was the source of information that we are getting is through the media, the social media, and anything that is connected to the internet, whatever screen. You know, we see on the screen things. And usually all what we see is also ephemeral, and even the news, we have it, it goes. So people pass with no names, areas or cities that we don't remember even, the names of this city. We might remember, this is Syria, oh, this comes from whatever, Libya, etc. But what the illustration or the comics gives is not the information, it is the added value of the expression. You know, when a drawing is done, like Olivier or like Zero Calcare, etc., and so on, these people are not going to document only, even if they are drawing the little lamp and the little girl and the blanket, etc., but the added value, or what they call now augmented reality, which is, this is the augmented reality that the comics is doing, and the illustration is the expression. We can, in illustration, that in movie you can't, in documentary you can't, in other medias or photos you can't, is that you can add the expression of the situation itself. And this, I think, shows clearly what the artist can do, right? And you can't put, let's say, express that woman carrying the burden of life, of humanity, and at the same time fighting. How can you express it in a movie or in a photograph? Zero Calcare put this girl, fighter, wearing the free fighter dress and having all really the details of her life as a mother, as a house keeper, as a teacher, as a fighter, etc. on her. So that added value that illustration can give is what I call the expression, how to draw graphically an expression, an emotion, or the essence of a situation. And this, I think, only illustration. And other thing, these artists give names to their people. they give faces to these people, and when you encounter them in an exhibit or in a book, as if you have this personal encounter with them, not sitting on a screen with other people and they pass and go and you don't forget even how they look like and something like that. So there's this also personal attitude and personal relation with them. I think that's the powerful, if you want, the strength of the little line and the little color on a page.
I keep going back to this idea of the intimacy of the drawing, the intimacy of the line. Somehow the line is very pliable. It can give us in-depth emotion. It can also give us social context. It really can, in certain hands, the meaning can be bottomless. And I feel that we're trying to touch something that's real as all these images go by, as we hear of those big numbers, as we hear stories, as we try to sort nationalities at all. I think it goes down to that, but I'm not sure, because I deal mainly with words and some images.
Any other questions? Okay, Fuad. Fuad is a comics artist from Lebanon.
So one thing that struck me watching all the presentations, when we're dealing with displacement, it feels like we're always talking about people in situations beyond their control, right? So how do you feel sort of comics, especially in terms of narrative, gives you the opportunity to give these people more agency?
Yeah.
So overall, it felt like there's this sort of theme where all these stories depict people in situations beyond their control. So how do you use these narratives to sort of give them back agency over their lives? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think.
I guess I just let the people speak for themselves. I don't really write about my experience, about these encounters. I present the people through my drawings. I give them a platform and basically let them do the talking and introduce themselves to an audience. And yeah.
I think the main role of all these artists or all these script writers, etc., is, especially in comics, I don't know, in illustration, is that the artist is a reflector. Yani it's not like a movie maker who have already a script or a news anchor who wants a specific line to take from this refugee or this situation, etc. The artist goes to these places, even if they are in memories, like the Armenian genocide, etc., as a reflector. And as a reflector, not only of the event itself, but a reflector of the emotions. And that's why all these, let's say, like Metz Yagern about the Armenian genocide, they are not realistic. They are not like the camera is taking, etc., and so on. They are the reflection of expressions. They are a reflection of emotions. And this is what the artist, I think, is doing rather than going and documenting, if I answered your question. I don't know.
It's interesting that you say the word agency, because I think I agree with Olivier about platforms. Even to make, it's very difficult, I'll be honest with you, to make these platforms. And if you go back to 2000 in Beirut, there were not many people, there were not many places that were willing to make platforms for these voices. Or if we look at 2000 in the wider world, there were not very many platforms for Arab culture, for Arab voices. I'm talking about particularly in the West. We've always had a very vibrant publishing scene here. So first constructing the platform, but what agency, I don't know in terms of do we change people's lives? No, the platform is an opportunity for people to speak for themselves in a world where there are many mediators and gatekeepers, the idea that people could speak for themselves, I think, is maybe the first step of agency. How they are saved, I don't know if that's something that the illustrator, the photographer, the writer can do, but there has to be an open generosity of spirit, I feel, a humanitarian need, a want on people who are not in that situation to tell those stories, not really from us, but for those people to say who they are and what they're about.
Jonathan.
I'll just add briefly, I found a kind of comfort in this history, even though it's a difficult history, and not that I'm happy that so many people have gone through exile or expatriation, but just to contextualize our moment, I'll give just a totally off-base example. My parents' generation were American, grew up in Detroit during what was the uprising or the 1968 riots in Detroit. And nowadays they're saying, Trump's America, I can't believe this is the most insane thing. And I tell them, you lived in a Detroit that was on a National Guard police lockdown. How can you think today is worse? But it's just, by diving back into these histories, I think we can actually find a kind of, going back to the first question, a kind of optimism, because generations before us have grappled with the exact same questions, problems, wars, difficulties, and actually created the very art forms that we appreciate so much today.
Indeed. Thank you. Yes, Mona Hala, thank you.
I was just wondering if you ever go back.
Can I just pass this or that?
Did you ever know if your publications go back to the people who were illustrated, to this? Do they see their stories? Like would Muhammad have a copy of this book at some point and see for his family how his story is being told? I'm interested to see, because when we do oral history, I'm working now with the fishermen in Ras Beirut, and it's like the first thing I thought about is that I want them to know how this is being told. It's not like taking the story from them and everybody else knows how it's being told except them. And I think this is, I don't know, I think this is an ethical responsibility to make sure this, this document or this, what we're showing the world is shown to the people themselves. I just wanted to note that.
Yes, I do send, at the beginning of the project, I didn't take the contact details of Mohammed, of Ahmed, and Habib, what makes me very annoyed with myself, because I would have loved to have sent them the finished book or the magazine, and but I'm in contact at the later stage. I wrote down all the email addresses and phone numbers. I guess phone numbers are changing all the time, and people are on the move, but I contacted some of the people, like for example, Ahin, the psychotherapist from I met in Domis, and I just sent her a book, the English. No, I sent her the German edition because I asked her if she wants the English or the German one, but she said she wants the German one because she is learning German at the moment. And she wrote back to me, and she was very kind of thankful, appreciated that I sent her the book, and she. I didn't ask her what she thinks about her portrait. I just sent it to her, and I think she really found it interesting. She liked it, and I hope that she's going to show the drawing of her to her child, to little. I forgot his name, but he was just born a year before I met her, and I hope that he will be able to look at it and see his mother through my eyes, maybe at some stage. And yeah, and I also sent the book to other people I met, or I sent them JPEGs of the drawings, and I didn't get any criticism from them. I guess I don't have a very close relationship to the people. All of the people I met them, some of them just for half an hour. Some of them I spend a couple of days with them, but I don't really have a very close relationship with the people, and so I didn't get any critical or very deep feedback, but so I got good responses, and I hope the people I depicted are happy with their portrayal.
I can talk about Kobani calling, at least, that I know that Zero Kalkari, because he went there, he adopted a cause, and when there is a cause, the two-way thing might be easier, because he drew really these women fighters, the real women fighters, etc., their lives, etc., and so on. And he used to report, and it was monthly or weekly published, etc., and then it came up as a book. But whenever the publication was out, he used to take it to the camps of these fighters, the YPK, etc., and they used to take it also, because they are people, engaged people, take it as a motivation for the youngster or for those who are coming, or the families of the martyrs, etc., as a booster, if you want, to their cause. So there is this relationship, at least in that case, because he was an engaged artist, he followed this cause of Rojava and the Kurdish cause, etc., especially these women who fought against ISIS. And his book, when he came out, and it was translated into Kurdish, and it is distributed in their camps. And of course, he jokes a lot about it, that he deformed in a way, because he didn't draw realistic drawings of these women, and he always say that they are much prettier than he used to draw, but their spirit for him was the prettiest thing that they have. So there is this go and come, but when an artist goes by himself to people with no cause, because most of these displaced people, they lost their causes, they lost almost their lives. So I don't know even if they will receive this thing. It's not like the fishermen here who are anchored or whatever, etc. With displacement, I don't know. It's a question that I raise. Would they care about it? I don't know.
One thing for the anthology that I did, Syria Speaks, is that when you make a platform, when you make this platform and you want to empower voices, you enter into a relationship. It's not an uncritical relationship for the artists and the cartoonists and the comic graphic artists graphic novelists that we included in the book. It's a back and forth. We're talking, but also because the book is going to be published not in the region, but in English in the West, there's another mediation that goes on. But also, I like to think of myself as not a colonizing editor. I'd rather hear what people want to tell me their stories are, what they are and how they want to do them. And I want to make sure, as an editor, I want to make sure, particularly in text, that it has that broad appeal, that it's not language that people in the West will turn away from. And then when these books come out, I really make sure that the people who are involved, the contributors, not only do they see the work before it goes to press, that they know exactly what they're getting, but afterwards they have the book too. And that usually if this platform, it's not my platform, but if the book's platform works, then the contributors tell me how people have reacted to their work, how opportunities have opened up to them. It's not that I'm mining it for my great whatever, I don't know, but it's really because this culture, seeing this culture walk and talk, it can change not only the lives of the people who are doing it, but the people who are seeing it. It makes them think again about why is it the Arab world, like people in the West, they don't think there are cartoonists, or they don't think there are fashion designers, or they don't think like these things are happening. It's a part of building bridges. It's terrible that we have all this war, this displacement, forced migration, But somehow at this time, people can talk to each other over great distances. And I think that's the thing, is empowerment, more communication, more exchange, you know. But it can also work the other way, that the regime sees the book and they start targeting the people that you have. So it's kind of a weird dance that you do.
Absolutely. Well, I want people to have, yes. Sorry. Okay, last question, because I think everybody's
in
ready
relation of what she said, I mean, for the authors who draw and tell those stories, do they think also about the public, the readers, to whom they want to address this, these stories?
To be honest, I didn't think too much about the audience. I probably spent more thoughts about the people I portrayed. And I guess for me, what is interesting in this context is that I got a grant from the Arts Council in England that gave me some money to work on this project, and they give you the money and they ask you in return that you do exhibitions, that you do talks. And so I did several exhibitions and events, and it's usually these events are visited by people who are really interested in migration and in refugees and human rights. And you could say that they are already converted. You don't need to tell them that it's a horrible experience to be a refugee, and that people want to continue their lives. They want to send their children to school in a safe environment. People want to continue their studies and leave the war and the conflict behind them. And there are lots of people in Europe or in the US who don't understand that. They don't want to have strangers, foreigners coming to their country. And I thought about that. I would rather reach an audience like this than the people who are going to buy the book anyway. And I guess it's the question is how to target these people, how to get them into your exhibition. And I spent thoughts on that, but I don't know how to do that, to be honest. And yeah.
I have a question for you, just a simple question. If you weren't commanded by Médecins Sans Frontières to do that work, could you have gone to these areas and did the job?
No, probably not, because first of all, I would have lacked the financial. I need money to create my work. I worked on this for almost 4 years, and I needed to have a backer. I needed to have an enabler who gets me there, because I wouldn't have gotten access to the camp. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have gotten it, and I wouldn't have known who to contact. And I needed this this enabler who got me into the geographically into the place, who introduced me to the people I wanted to portray. And I don't think I would have done it. I would have maybe done it if a magazine would have commissioned me to do that. But I needed this first, someone to make the first step to get me there.
I think we're all ready. Thank you very much for our panelists for an amazing talk. Do you want to add something? Please, no.
Okay.
Wait, we're adding Jonathan's. No, please. I mean, I didn't see it.
It's okay. I don't really have anything to say on
Though
this.
you're going to say it.
I guess we can talk in terms of audience. I'm a journalist writing usually about comics and art and culture, so it's a bit of a flip of, the audience really does come first, because like you had just mentioned, people, when I say I work on cartoonists in the Arab world, they have, in the West or in Boston where I'm living, they have no idea that such a thing exists, so you really have to hold their hand, and while also being deeply committed to the research and the stories and the facts, and not distorting it to oversimplify it. So I think it's a huge balance between these two components, which is the responsibility to introduce many of the people here's works to new audiences, and thus you have to be quite slow and careful and detail-oriented with the histories, but also to not undermine and make it too easy to understand, because these are complex, controversial issues.
I'm really glad that you added that, so that I didn't cut it off. Thank you so much for being with us and for the discussion. Thank you, audience. You're all welcome to a coffee break outside and a nice sea view. And I'll give you, seriously, 10 minutes because, what time is it? I have no idea. Back at 2:15? Back at 2:15. Not later, please.